Wow, what a turnout. I told the Wickwire family, should we need extra seating in the balcony, we can set it up. And here we are doing that. Happy Sabbath and welcome to Sun Valley Fellowship. My name is Pastor Jerry, and we just want to welcome you here. Today is a celebration of a life. Just let you find your seats. We're here to remember Bob Wickwire. We also want to remind you that there is a time for sharing, an anecdote or a tribute. The family wants to say they may limit your time in the sharing. So there'll be a time for sharing at the end of the service or partway through the service. The order of the service is just going to be sketches and memories, escapades of growing up, adventures of growing up, hat-grabbing tales and capers with Grandpa Bobby, anecdotes from friends and family. Pastor Josue will give us a message. We'll have some music by Dave and Tanya Fung, and then we'll have our benediction and a closing song. When we close, we want to welcome everybody over to our fellowship hall for visiting and sharing and more celebration. Bob was survived by his wife of 59 years, Jerry Lou Wickwire, a sister, Jan Crawford, son, Judd Wickwire, and his wife, Karen, grandson, Jake Wickwire, grandson, Zach Wickwire, and daughter, Cynthia Wickwire, grandson, Joel Schneider, and his wife, Maya, great-grandchildren, Ronan and Ambrin, granddaughter, Carrie Schneider, and soon-to-be great-granddaughter that he was so very much hoping would arrive on his birthday, Danielle Schneider. On behalf of all of these people, they want to welcome you here to celebrate this life of Mr. Wickwire. As we open, I wish to share a couple verses with you. In 1 Thessalonians chapter 4:16, it says, "For the Lord himself will come down from heaven with a loud command, with the voice of an archangel, and with the trumpet call of God. And the dead in Christ will rise first. After that, we who are still alive and are left will be caught up together with them in the clouds to meet the Lord in the air. And so we will be with the Lord forever. And therefore, we will encourage each other with these words and that promise." We as believers know that the end of things on earth will be a triumphant end. Revelation 21 says, "Then I saw a new heaven and a new earth, for the first heaven and the first earth had passed away, and there was no longer any sea. I saw the holy city, the new Jerusalem, coming down out of heaven from God, prepared as a bride beautifully dressed for her husband. And I heard a loud voice from the throne saying, 'Look, God's dwelling place is now among the people, and he will dwell with them. They will be his people, and God himself will be with them and be their God.' And here's the favorite part. He will wipe every tear from their eyes. There will be no more death, or mourning, or crying, or pain. For the old order of things will have passed away." What a hope we have. Let's pray. Father God, bless us in this service. Bless each heart and mind that's mourning, but also going to be sharing. Help them to center themselves in you and to have the indwelling Spirit just wash over them with comfort. What a legacy Robert has left. I see it living on in each one of his children and his friends and family. What a gift you made him to be, Lord. Let us give justice to the gift that you made Robert Wickwire to be. Bless us as we partake. Amen.
Yeah, great. Well, hello, everyone. I am Bobby's little sister. He was my big brother. I always called him Bobby from the very first years that I knew him. My family knows, our families know, that the first thing we did when we got together is that Bobby and I would huddle in a corner and talk about our childhood. And that is because we thought it was unique and special. We grew up during World War II. I was born 3 months before World War II started. And so we did, things were different. My parents moved anywhere and everywhere they could find work. And I'll never understand how that happened, because this was in the 1930s. Your telephone went on the wall that you dialed, picked up, and you had a party line. So how in the world did my parents know they could go to Oakland, California and find work building houses? I don't understand it. They must have had a drum or something that told them how to do that. So most of our early years were spent in and around the Willamette Valley and on the Oregon coast. This was I've already talked about that part, so sorry. I think that we must have been able to pack up everything we owned in our car and move to wherever it was. I often thought we were kind of like gypsies, because we didn't really have a permanent home where we stayed, our longtime home, until we were in high school. And my brother and I went to 12 different schools during our growing up years. So that tells you how much we traveled. When I think of my brother, I think of him being outdoors. To see him indoors would only be to eat and sleep. I think that was the way he operated. First house I remember was living in Danabo, Oregon. It was a little suburb of Eugene. He and my cousin Wilma Jean used to roam around out in a big field. And if I was lucky enough to get to go, if the ditches were too big for me to jump over, they would just pick me up and throw me over. It's an idea of what it was like to be his little sister. When we lived there, we went to a one-room schoolhouse. I was in the first grade in one row. He was 2 rows over in the third grade. One of the things that happened while we lived there is that he was playing with some friends in a big barn. He was up in a haymow and somehow either fell or was maybe pushed, we never knew quite what, onto a big iron stanchion down below, hit his head, fractured his skull. And today you would have the paramedics there in a heartbeat. Well, no, not in the 1940s. My mom and dad put him in the car and took him to the hospital. He had a fractured skull. He recovered. It took him 3 months in the hospital, but he survived. And he wore a metal protector on his head for a number of years, which he hated having to wear, but he did. Let's see, what else do you want to know? Then we moved to a little city called Mapleton, which was these are very short little moves, but nevertheless, they were in different towns. So in this little town called Mapleton, and you'll see this kind of a trend here with him, he likes to climb up places. He climbed up into the attic one day and fell to the ceiling. Well, Mom and Dad just packed us up in the middle of the night, and off we went to another city. They couldn't afford to pay for the damage to the ceiling, so they just took us to another city. And there's also a pattern here too. Let's see, when we were in Florence, another time, climbed up on the rooftop, right? And as he was daring, as many of you know, he jumped off the rooftop, landed with his foot on a board with a nail, went through his shoe into his foot. Well, we were home alone, and he said to me, still makes me laugh, this has been a long time ago, go down to Davy Jones' Locker, the little store down the street, and get a bottle of mercurochrome. So off I go. Now, I keep taking you back to the 40s. This was what was the main highway on the Oregon coast. Davy Jones' Locker was probably several hundred yards, right? I was 7 years old. Can you imagine sending your 7-year-old down the road today? There I was, go down to Davy Jones, and this was back when you could just rent a tab at the grocery store, so they didn't think anything of it when his 7-year-old shows up and asks for a bottle of mercurochrome. So he took it back, dumped it on his foot, said, I think we need another. So he sent me back. Well, this time they wanted to know what was up. They knew that there was something definitely wrong. So, eventually my parents came home, and the doctor was there, and they got his foot out. The other thing we did when we lived there is, it's no news to anybody that Bobby was a prankster, right? He loved to play jokes on people. So one of the earliest things he did was to find one of my mom's purses, tie some fishing line on it, and put it out in the middle of the road. Somebody comes down the road, right? And he starts pulling it, and we run to the woods, out of sight, and people would often stop their car and look around and say, where's the purse, right? Well, we did that a number of times until one day a woman stopped, and she chased us into the woods and said, that's my purse. She was convinced that, I don't know how she could ever manage to think that, but she seemed to think that it was her purse. There's many things that happened. Another one was that we were driving an old car, they were all old cars then, or now, that had those suicide doors. When you open it, it goes to the back. So we were driving down the road one day, and my brother handed me a candy bar wrapper and said, here, throw this out the window. Long before recycling, there was no recycling in those days. So I reached behind me, right, thinking I would get the window and roll it down. Nope, I got the door handle, and I went flying out the door. My dad looked in the rearview mirror and saw me flying through the air. I was fine, landed on my knees. He thinks I landed on my head, but apparently not. So I never forgave him for that. It's like, throw your own candy bar wrappers out the window. Don't ask me to do that anymore. Let's see, it was a prankster. Oh yeah, we had horses. One was called Major, and he was really kind of a lanky old horse. He wasn't much, but we thought he was an Arabian stallion. We had great imaginations in those days. And he would send me down in this big, big field. Remember, I was young. Everything was bigger than life in those days, to get the horse. And he was a mean horse. He'd rather bite me than look at me. I had to wade through the swamp with, now I'm embellishing just like he would do. Through the swamp, with snakes and who knows what was in there to get the horse and get a hackamore or a bridle on and bring me back down to the barn. So he would let me ride for a while until he was tired, and then he wanted on, so he threw dirt clods at the horse until the horse bucked me off, and then he could get on the horse and ride. So we used to go to a lot of Western movies when we were kids. They were cheap entertainment. We would go and sit in these Western movies. And he mastered the trick of running up behind the horse, putting his hands on the haunches, and jumping on the horse. And this horse was, I don't know how he ever survived it, because he wasn't a nice horse. I can't imagine how he did that without getting kicked. So we did a lot of things. I have to tell you this one. Bobby hunted birds from a very young age, fished. It was just part of his nature. I think he was born with the fishing rod in his hand. So one time he and a buddy were out hunting, had their shotguns, probably looking for pheasants in those days. And he came back in the house, and they were unloading their guns in the house, right? You don't do that, but he did. And his shotgun was aimed at a wall, and I was on the other side, right over there, just like that. The gun went off. He came running into the other room and said, "Are you all right?" And all I could think of to say was, "I don't know, am I bleeding?" I wasn't. But I mean, you know, just a fraction of an inch to one side and it would have been full of pellets. So that was the house where he did something that made me mad. I ran after him with a butcher knife and he locked himself in the bathroom. So we had I think we did that more than once. That's where we had cows, we churned butter, you know, helped milk the cows. Mom and Dad my dad was basically a log truck driver, but Mom would go to the auction and buy little chicks or a pig or a calf, and we would raise them until we had food to go in the freezer. So it was just a way of life for us. We roamed the woods, peeled and dried chittenden bark. Who knows what chittenden bark is? All right, didn't think so. Cascara bark, it's a laxative. Anyway, we did that. We found lady slippers, little tiny little old lady slippers up in the hills, sunken mounds that we thought were Indian graves, chased my mean bulls, and played together in the band, and we just had countless adventures. We made a lot of trips up into the Oregon Cascades with our parents fishing and hunting. You know, Bobby inherited our dad's love of fishing and hunting, and I inherited, thankfully, his love of nature. You know, today, if kids were to do, we did the things that give parents nightmares today to have their kids do, but we just did them. So we always promised that we would write a book, right? Well, he did write a book, but not about our childhood. And I discovered at Jerry Lou's home that he had actually written in a book many, many of the childhood memories that I didn't know about. So I'll be looking at that to finish writing that book. He told me when he was in Troy that, yes, he would help me write the book, but he would no doubt embellish it. So now I get to embellish the book. He had his chance and he didn't do it. You know, our parents taught us the value of hard work. We learned to be resilient and how to problem solve and never, ever give up. And we carried these values with us and taught them to our children so that they would be passed on to future generations. So in addition to the legacy he left to everyone by writing his book, he left a beautiful family legacy to carry on all the things he loved. And my family and I are honored to share in that legacy. And I just want to say one more thing. I believe it's a poet, Rumi, who phrased this, and that is that we are all walking each other home. And we have walked my brother home. Thank you.
Speaking of that scar on Dad's head, I finally talked him into not having a comb over because I told him scars were cool. So finally he buzzed his hair the last couple of years instead of having a comb over. Told him if I could have a big scar from my heart surgery, he could have a scar on his head. Thanks, Aunt Janet, for sharing your memories. It's nice to hear that he was just not the brother that drooled on your face. Even though he did lots of other things. Had to write big so I didn't have to wear my glasses. Today we appreciate friends and family that are here and any that could not be here that are watching, some as far away as Australia. Each of you have your own memories and stories. Thank you for the fishing and hunting friends that were an important part of Dad's life. You always took time for him and made real efforts. Thank you. Thank you to the little community of Troy that embraced him, where he hunted for nearly 30 years. We know you enjoyed the giant chocolate bars he brought you. We all know that Dad published a book, and he probably talked many of you into purchasing one. I'm pretty sure I called him the book whore. He didn't know that, but he pretty much sold one everywhere he went. Janet talked about another book that he wrote, and he spent many hours writing in it. 25 years ago, he was given this book called The Father's Legacy Journal, and no one knew that he wrote in it, but probably on the nights that he said he couldn't sleep, he wrote in it. And in this book, our family received his last gift to us. Mom found it on the coffee table, and he put it there before he left on his final hunting trip. It's a beautiful reflection of his quiet, quirky, and witty character, which many of you probably knew, and maybe his mean brotherhood. Most importantly, it showed many insightful thoughts, caring sentiments, and incredible memories. And there's one that I want to share with you. I haven't read through this book yet because there's just little things that take a lot of time to process because I haven't been through this before. But I kind of got stuck on this one page. It said, if you have 2 hours of conversation with anyone on earth, who would that be? And why that person? What would you talk about? He said, that would have to be both my son and daughter. It would be all about me because my desire is to be more communicative and supportive. Not that I'm totally lacking, I just want to be less judgmental and detailed in our conversations. And their suggestions would be priceless. So I kind of got stuck on that one. I'll read this later because it's an incredible book, as Janet said. It has like questions, and then he's been writing in this for 25 years and we didn't know. And he left it on the table. And we don't know why he left it on the table, but we're glad he did. We're glad he found it. On this back of the bulletin, you'll find 7 of the most important lessons in life, and those are direct quotes from the book that he wrote. So I'll read them for those who aren't here. The book called for 5, but he put 7, just to add more. Make sure the brain is engaged before opening mouth. You can become what you dislike if you dwell upon it. Straying from God can make yours and the life of others miserable. Be careful what you say or do because it will come back to you. You'll always do better than you thought if you accept a challenge. People want to laugh, don't disappoint them. Giving more of yourself is better than keeping it for yourself. I'd just like to take a moment to acknowledge my mom, our mom, Jerry Lou. Almost 60 years ago, exactly, because it was right after his birthday, which is December 18th. This man named Bob walked into an ice cream shop where she worked in Oregon and asked her on a date. But he was actually there with another girl. And he whispered to her that he would be back for her soon. So after a long weekend, a whole weekend of driving around and meeting friends and family, touring all the places he had lived, and talking more than she had ever heard from him in all these years, he sweet-talked her enough into saying yes and to getting married in one weekend. He must have known right away how amazing she was and knew he needed her beside him in life and all the adventures he had planned. I think it's because he'd already been up north and done one season of in the woods and knew he needed a woman there. They were married in less than a month, and then soon after they headed to northern BC with no running water and an outhouse to begin the pioneer life that spanned almost 40 years in the fishing lodge business. I could tell you more, but it's in the book, so that was his thing. He answered to everyone. And I haven't read all the book, but of course I will. Here's a poem I found that he wrote about her, because he was really quirky. I have me a wife, the thrill of my life. Her name is Jerry Lou, sweet, kind, and always true to me. You always know who. You already know who. Best mother, cook, reader of books, outstanding seamstress too. You do so much with your magic touch. We all appreciate you. So thank you, Mom, for being the sometimes unacknowledged woman who worked so hard for so many years, raised children in the woods, built lodges, supported as many adventures, camped in a tent, fished on the ice, and floated the lakes in a belly boat beside him. Thank you for being the foundation of our family, for your children, grandchildren, great-children, and many others, for being the rock that held Dad solid for your 60 years together. So let's learn from the best, Babby and Bob. Take time for people in your life, have adventures and build memories. It's the most important thing we can do for ourselves and each other. Thank you.
Thank you, Cynthia. It's like adjusting microphones is never as easy as it looks. Well, growing up with Dad, well, as has been mentioned before, this probably isn't really necessary because there is the book. My dad had a way of living that I think somehow imagined he was going to be with us forever. And the legend that Cynthia talked about is something that as a family we're incredibly proud of. He lived a life of a risk and adventure and started out heading up north to British Columbia on the simple. He and Larry saw an article in a magazine in Field and Stream about the giant steelhead on the Babine, and that's what took them there. They had no idea how they were going to do all this stuff. They just went up to do this. They got up there and they bought this fishing lodge or a piece of property with some rundown cabins on it. Tried to start a business, didn't make nearly enough money to pay the bills. Got way behind on the payments on the mortgage, but the mortgage payment, they actually tried to repossess it, and they mailed out the mortgage or the repossession notice to the wrong address. And before it finally got sorted out, they had managed to work to raise enough money to catch up the payments. So that's how close maybe that dream was to coming to an end. But even if it had, I'm sure he would have come up with another dream. My dad also lived in a way that was never intended to be, he didn't want to be famous or well-known, or nothing was for prestige, it was just for the adventure. And the more people he could share that adventure with, the better. Whether it was catching fish or hunting or just being out and doing something that was unusual or maybe even nearly impossible. Growing up, we were good friends with Dean and Joyce Bonley. They had met Mom and Dad on Babine Lake. They'd driven up there in their boat and just shown up at the door. I remember growing up in Smithers, every time we'd go into Smithers, we would just go to the Bonley's house and walk in the door. We didn't have, of course, there was no way to give them notice. For years, we were just these guests that would show up. They didn't have to be even home. We could show up, go in, stay in their home. Bonleys were Seventh-day Adventists, but they didn't push their faith. All those years that we were there, they just showed their faith through their kindness and generosity. As did other Adventists over the years. We had landlords and the doctor in the hospital where Cynthia and I were born. All of these Christians showed their faith to us, or to my parents, in just kindness and generosity, just in a simple way. And it was years later before sorry, I skipped a part here. Oh, so Dean and my dad had an adventuresome streak that they shared. But one of the unfortunate things is we put two guys together, that adventuresome streak can turn into recklessness or something like that. So they took, and this was the year that Mom and Dad were married, and they took the panel van. Lake Catherine had frozen over in Smithers unexpectedly early in the year, and they thought it would be great fun to take the panel van out and tow each other around the lake on skis, until they hit a thin spot in the ice and the van went through the lake, through the ice. as growing up, I remember hearing this story told, and I remember my mom telling the story that Dean and my dad, when they came back to the house, they were laughing so hard they couldn't tell them what had actually happened. And that van had everything that my parents owned in it. Regardless of the antics, it was a friendship that helped lead my mom and dad to, years later, study and join the Adventist church. My dad lived his faith in a quiet but firm way, and is noted repeatedly in that book that Cynthia talks about, and that too is part of his legacy to us. So just a few things growing up. I heard a phrase recently that went like this: "You can't hurt my feelings because I held a flashlight for my dad." Before I was old enough to do very much to help, it was my job to hold the light. Like, for example, when the generator would quit in the evening when we had a lodge full of guests, and he's trying to fix it, and so my job would be to hold the light. And I, 8 years old, holding the light, and pretty soon it's cold and the light wanders, and what's that noise over there? And the light here, and then, finally grab the flashlight, the light right here, Those kinds of things, and perhaps not the kindest of words that my dad used, but I think he gets a pass for that one. One of the things my dad did during the off season, everything that wasn't hunting and fishing was off season, was sell cars, and he was always a wheeler dealer. So we never had things for long. Cars, trucks, boats. The standing joke is, of course, that my mom was the only thing that he'd ever parted with. In 1976, for example, we had seen one of these new Honda Civics around on the road, and my dad decided he wanted one of those. We lived on the Sunshine Coast. There's no Honda dealer there, so he called the dealer in Vancouver, made a deal over the phone. The salesman met him at the ferry dock. My dad gave him a check. My dad got in the car and drove it on the ferry. So we drove that red Honda around for a year, my dad happily honking at all the other Honda owners. And then he sold it a year later for more than he paid for it. So that was the track record. Everything was for sale eventually. You may notice I'm wearing boots up here today. A lot of our family is. My dad was on a 30-year quest for the perfect pair of boots. Dozens and dozens of pairs of boots were returned to Cabela's and these other places. I think we should notify Cabela's that Bob will no longer be returning boots, because they probably had a whole department for that. They would leak. He would buy a brand new pair of boots, and he'd come to me and he said they leak like a sieve. They're supposed to be, he'd send them back, or they didn't fit. And my dad had really wide feet. They were like paddles. And he just had a hard time finding boots, but just constantly returning boots. So it's many of you may have had contact with his boot quest for various different ways. In an ironic twist, the pair of boots that he was wearing on the day that he died on the mountain was a borrowed pair of worn-out boots from his friend Martin. My dad had a clown switch. Every time you pointed a camera at him, he would make a goofy face, turn his hat sideways, pretend to fall down. It was an instant transformation that he would return to normal just as quickly when the camera was turned off. And you could raise the camera, he'd do it. He'd took the camera down, he'd turn to normal. My dad had the most fun carrying out pranks on unsuspecting people, as you've already heard. On the Babine River, there is a fisheries salmon counting weir just a mile or so from where our trout camp was when I was a kid. We knew the staff there very well. And there's also pie in the kitchen, something I learned early, that every fishing, hunting, mining, or logging camp had a cook, and I could count on finding pie or some other treat if I wandered in innocently. Anyway, the fisheries camp, one year the manager was a guy named Alfie. That same year, Pacific Western Airlines launched a computer system they called Alfie. One day we were at the airport, and my dad made the connection. He grabbed a whole bunch of these brochures that had Alfie on them. It was an 80-mile drive back out to the Babine, and at every fork in the road there was a fisheries sign pointing in the direction of which way to go. On each one of those signs, my dad stapled up the part of the brochure that said, "Just ask Alfie what it's all about." My dad laughed out loud every time we stapled another one up, and after a few days, I remember Alfie asking if my dad knew anything about these Alfie signs. Of course, he feigned innocence. Regardless, Alfie knew, And a few days later, he and a boatload of his crew showed up at our dock and proceeded to chase my dad down and throw him in the lake. I was terrified because I thought they were going to do something awful to him, but it was all part of the game. Speaking of the lake, Cynthia and I were not allowed to go anywhere near the water by ourselves or without a life jacket. I don't know how to swim. I didn't know how to swim, and even now I'm not sure exactly what the objective was, but my parents decided they needed to throw me in the lake. I think they underestimated my agility and determination to avoid being thrown in, and it took them quite a while to detach me from them and the dock cleats before tossing me in. That may have been the closest thing to childhood trauma I had. Unfortunately, at some point they learned of a place called the YMCA. We had several dogs growing up. Rusty was my dad's favorite. He was a dark red golden retriever. He was the most tolerant dog you could imagine. Cynthia and I would climb and sit on him, and he never had enough. Whenever he had enough, he would just walk away. Like all of our dogs, though, staying home wasn't on their DNA. Our dogs wandered off all the time. Cynthia had a Norwegian elk hound called Chemo. He was better at staying home, and so when we stayed at Bonley's in Williams Lake one time, we trusted that he would stick around. Unfortunately, he disappeared. And so Dad and I took the truck and were driving all over Williams Lake trying to find Chemo. It's a fairly distinctive dog, has a curly tail. And we finally found him, just standing in someone's yard. So we loaded up Chemo in the truck and happily drove back to Bonley's. We pulled up. I opened the tailgate. Cynthia comes out. Says, "That's not Chemo." So Dad and I had kidnapped someone's dog from its yard. So we had to discreetly go back and return it to its home. Fortunately, that was before doorbell cameras or any of those things. Cynthia and I were given a lot of responsibility growing up. For years, we rented houses. Every year, in the off season, we rented a different house. And then one year, there was enough money left over for something. And we were given a choice. We could choose a trip to Hawaii, like an epic trip to Hawaii, or we could buy a house. So fortunately, Cynthia and I chose the house. When we started Silver Hilton in 1984, we started making these risky decisions together. And now I was the one wanting to be more out on a limb. One of the things was an airplane. Dad was actually a pretty nervous flyer, but if an airplane took him to a fish, then it was worth the risk. So we got an airplane. Our first one was pretty small. It had 2 seats. So we had an airstrip at the lodge, and one of the things we liked to do was take off in the late summer evenings and fly over the nearby lakes really low, and I would fly really low, and my dad would watch for any rise forms of any fish that were rising on the lakes. And that's how we would decide which lakes we wanted to fish, if we only had a helicopter. So this one evening, we got back and we flew over the airstrip, and Cynthia's dog Chemo was sitting in the middle of the airstrip. I made a couple of passes and the dog wouldn't move. It's starting to get late in the evening, and then after we're circling around for a while, my mom came out and she's standing on the side of the airstrip, wondering why we're circling around. And we finally decided we'd write her a note. So Dad got something and wrote a note on it, and I made another low pass and we threw it out. My mom fortunately found the note, realized the dog was on the airstrip, and chased the dog away, and we finally landed. The funny part was that typically, even this one slightly overbanked turn with my dad in an airplane, and he'd be ready to lose his cookies. But he was so focused on the dog that he'd never even noticed those multiple tight turns we were making over the airstrip. Eventually, we did get a helicopter. We had a big map on the wall with all the lakes. We named them with the letters from the Greek alphabet, alpha, beta, pi, etc. And we used the helicopter to put small boats and canoes on some of the ones that were better fishing, those ones that had those rise forms on them. We had a couple staying with us, so I flew my dad and this gentleman up to one of the lakes. We got him set up in a small aluminum boat with an electric motor. Of course, there's a battery for the motor, and as we helped push him out into the lake, he shifted to one side of the boat, and all of a sudden the boat swamped and went underwater, and so we all ended up in the lake trying to save him. It was all okay in the end, but later we learned that this guest was the president of the Trial Lawyers Society of America. So I think we dodged a bullet there. The helicopter was my dad's favorite, though. We were constantly trying to get enough work done to justify heading up another lake, mountain, or river. One of the things I always had to get after my dad for was we'd be coming into land, and he would be so eager to get to fishing that he'd be undoing his seatbelt and getting the door open before we even landed. But that's the way Dad was. Every new adventure was as exciting as the previous one, even catching a fish. For those who have been fishing with my dad, or even caught a fish around my dad, it was like the first one that he had ever caught. There was so much enthusiasm with every single one. As his lifetime was absolutely boundless enthusiasm. There are a lot more stories, but as I've been contemplating my dad's history, I've noticed a pattern that had never really jumped out at me before, and you heard it from Jan already. He never gave up on anything. As a matter of fact, it wasn't even one of the options. I realize now that this is something that is a clear characteristic of our family. If there was ever one single legacy, it would be the thing that I would identify with. We don't give up, not on family, at work, adventure, or ourselves. I couldn't be more proud of my dad and our entire family for all being part of carrying that legacy forward.
Well, now I know where Dad figured out how to tell us how to hold a flashlight. So I'm just going to read something I wrote here. I titled it The Legacy of a Fisherman. I read recently about a theory of shared memory, that you can know things without recalling them because you have somebody who holds the knowledge for you. Grandpa Bob was the epitome of stored knowledge. He forgot more about fishing in a day than I could learn in a year, and I'm certain that if a man's worth was counted by the fish he'd caught, my grandpa would be the wealthiest man on earth, not because he caught them himself. To call back the stored knowledge idea, he's the one that taught me to cast, taught me to notice a bite, read the river, notice the trends, and choose the fly, line, and rod to best suit the waters, and I'm not the only one. Every fish that I and countless others have caught would never have posed for a photo or sizzled on a grill if Babine Bob hadn't spread his knowledge throughout the masses where I know it will be propagated throughout generations to come. Grandpa accomplished a great many things. However, tents were something that he could never quite conquer. Over the years, Grandma would often call me and hint that perhaps I should drop in and see what Grandpa was doing in the garage. And sure enough, I'd get there, and he'd be in the garage with a half-assembled or half-disassembled tent, mumbling about how it's impossible, the tent must be broken or something, and there's no way that it's doing what it's supposed to do. I'd always get the tent taken down or put up, knowing that I might get a call to come help take it down the next day. And he'd go, "What? I can't believe it." Every time. I think if he had his way, he'd cut down a forest and build a log cabin instead of putting up a pop-up tent. The accomplishments that surprised me the most was his book. I always thought books were written by intellectuals who went to expensive colleges and spent most of their days in coffee shops. But he was a mountain man who shared his stories without letting anything get in the way, especially not the truth. His memory was suspiciously good. He could remember all kinds of things from his childhood and past fishing trips. I struggle to remember the names of lakes that I've been to, but Grandpa could recall the name of a bay in a specific lake, on a mountain, and what fly was best for a specific fish there. And I'm glad that we have it all written down in his book, which for me became a conglomeration of bedtime stories that I'd heard so many times it felt like I lived them. Speaking of his book, everyone knows a writer or an artist's work is never fully appreciated when they're alive. That being said, I will be selling my signed copy of Babine Bob's Fishing Adventures in the lobby. Starting bid will be $5,000 if anyone's interested. Grandpa loved jokes, but not good ones. He would make up a horrible joke, or I would make up a horrible joke, and I'd see his wheels turning. Before long, he'd have some equally horrible version ready to go. And we'd be in Grandma's living room just laughing at the dumbest thing you've ever heard. Countless times I'd call their house and Grandma would quickly tell me how things had been before Grandpa would take over the phone and say, "I was just thinking about you." And I'd say something like, "Well, yeah, that's why I called." And he'd tell me his favorite joke of the week. Even through the phone, I could tell he was grabbing his hat and cringing at my stories, how dangerous he thought they would be. And I knew he would always tell me that he was up late at night sometimes, couldn't sleep because he knew what we were doing when we were flying. And as Dad said, he had a bit of a fear of flying sometimes. Zach and I went to visit him in the hospital during his casual run-in with cancer. I remember cracking jokes back and forth and laughing so hard that the nurse told us we were going to make him pop his stitches. She then asked him about his medical history, and he completely forgot about his open heart surgery. When I spoke up, he said, "Oh, yeah, that was just a triple bypass, only minor," which caused all of us, including the nurse, to burst into laughter. I've assumed nurses have seen it all, but we had her laughing until she left the room, and I don't think that happens very often. As I said before, he taught me how to cast. I don't know how many of you fish or how you learned it, but let me tell you Grandpa's teaching methods. So picture this, if you will. Zach and I are staying at Grandpa's house, and we're so excited to wake up and have Grandma's amazing sourdough pancakes. They really are fantastic. We wake up, and before we can do anything, Grandpa makes us go to the bathroom and just chug water from the sink. He's very strict about water being the very first thing, drinking water being the very first thing you do in the morning, and drinking water is still the first thing I do in the morning. So we'd finally get some of Grandma's pancakes, and Grandpa would tell us we're going to go practice casting. Contrary to what you may think, this does not mean that we're going to a body of water. Instead, we go to a park. He would steal some of Grandma's fabric and tie it to the end of the line like we were trying to catch a tailor. And there we would be for hours in the park, fly fishing. And it didn't take long for Zach and I to realize that if we replaced the fabric with acorns, we could catch squirrels, which Grandpa found very entertaining, even though he was a little upset because acorns are a little too heavy to accurately imitate flies. So at the time, I thought this was the worst way to spend a day. But a dozen years later, I often found myself casting at nothing just to practice. One day I hope to recreate how effortlessly he could toss a fly, but at the same time I hope I don't. He set the bar very high, and for the rest of my life I will be that 6-year-old hoping to cast a piece of fabric as well as he could. Now that he's gone, the memory will only be exaggerated, just like he would want. If I can cast 30 feet, he can cast 50. And if I cast 50, he could cast 70. He'll always be the wisest and most skilled fisherman, and he set a standard that I will always consider unattainable, no matter how far I get. Grandpa taught me more than I currently know. I love him and miss him, and as I grow older, I will continue to gain wisdom from his memory and from the silent smiles brought about by the recollection of moments we shared.
I had a hard time finding words for describing my grandpa, but I did my very best. Growing up with Grandpa was a blessing that I'll never take for granted. Growing up, Jake and I spent many of our days and nights at our grandparents' house. We learned early on of the legends and adventures of our grandpa. We often visited the Silver Hilton Lodge where he spent many years of his life, and we were able to admire the legacy that he had created. Every day when we were young, my grandpa would take his dog for a walk up the hill, and often my brother and I would tag along. We would walk up to the red gate that was close to the top. It's the same hill that I wander with my dog today. We spent so much time outdoors, camping, fishing, and hiking. I would always catch him humming or whistling a song, even though he told me that he couldn't carry a tune in a bucket. We spent many hours together fishing in his green tin boat. More often than not, we'd come home with no luck. I think he saved all the fishing for me and catching for himself. When we were visiting, Grandpa would make us blueberry smoothies. I'm not sure what he put in those smoothies, but I haven't had a better smoothie since. We spent many mornings eating breakfast with Grandpa and Grandma. When we had pancakes, I remember throwing leftover pancakes like frisbees off the deck to Grandpa's dog down below. At dinner time, after we all had our fill, Grandpa would find his seat on the couch with his food that more often than not was straight out of the pot. Whenever Grandpa came out of his room with a shirt on that had a hole in it, no matter how small, the inevitable question from my brother and I would come, "Is that a wear hole or a tear hole?" My brother and I would both shout, "Tear hole," and proceed to tear the shirt right off his back. Grandpa had a love for sports. He would sometimes reminisce about his high school glory days playing baseball. He was eager to be involved with my sports in high school and would sometimes even come just to watch practice. I remember playing basketball with him occasionally, and even at his ripe age, he could still shoot better than me. If you ever had the misfortune of driving with my grandpa, you will know of his painfully slow driving speed. And if that wasn't bad enough, try having him as a passenger while driving with a learner's permit. It involved a lot of slowdowns and him grabbing his hat out of stress. He always gave me a ride if I needed, and would sometimes offer even if I didn't need a ride at all. Grandpa always cared about what was going on in my life and what the next step for me was. He liked my dog a lot, and every time I showed him one of Archer's new tricks, he just couldn't believe it. I attribute my adoration of dogs greatly to him for always having one around. One thing about my grandpa is that he was always very proud of me, even for the things I didn't think were worth being proud of. Things won't be the same without having him around, but I will always appreciate all the time we spent together and cherish it for the rest of my life.
My dear beloved Uncle Bobby, I had such high hopes that my next visit to Kelowna would bring me together with you on a walk along a singing creek or a sloping trail where I would be able to express to you my collection of memories and laughter and joy stretched out over the decades, perhaps not so numerous to fill volumes of pages, but each and all a treasure in my heart. All for you and for being your niece. And since there's no one here to contest it, your favorite niece. How can it be that my tough and brave and full of life Uncle Bobby is gone from this earth so suddenly, and even at almost 87 years old too soon? And yet it is so. I am grateful to share some of these memories that have gathered with those who have gathered now, who loved and who will remember you in the thousands of ways you enriched our lives and our souls. My earliest memory of you was much like the photo of you on the bulletin. You were strong and brave and fearless, barely able to contain the life force about to burst forth, like a salmon swimming out to sea or a young buck in springtime. I was very little, about 3 years old. I was rummaging through Nanny's, your mother and my grandmother, cookie tins of buttons and costume jewelry. You gave me a bit of a scolding for being where I didn't belong, but I told on you. And Nanny gave you a bit of a scolding because I did have her permission. I thought that was fair. No more scoldings from that moment on, although I was worthy of some, especially in the 1970s. It was not long after that day that my little sister Linda and I got to be the flower girls in your wedding to my forever enchanting and pretty as a cake topper bride, my Auntie Jerry Lou. How happy everyone was on that day, except maybe Nanny, who was a little less happy because she liked to spoil you a lot, and I could see that even at 4 years old. The next thing we knew, there was a new baby, my cousin Jed, on the way. My cousin Jed and my cousin Cynthia, my beloved and forever friends, especially in adulthood. The early years growing up held the promise of time together, vivid in my memories, however scattered our gatherings were. Playing together with Jed while Mom and Jerry Lou prepared our meals, always the musical sound of their voices and their laughter. You must have been building a fire or creating a path, always in motion, always the life force in every room. After Daddy-O, your father and my grandfather died so suddenly and unexpectedly, I remember seeing less of you as your life's calling drew you to the higher latitudes of British Columbia, more often and finally altogether. My next memory, it is the summer of 1971. Mom has embarked us on our great and grand adventure on a trip to the mouth of the wild and wondrous Babine River for a week of life at the trout camp among you and your beloved family, each of you in your glorious element. Judd, at 6 years old, already a seasoned first mate, baiting every hook, netting every fish, and navigating any boat. Cynthia, at 18 months old, naked and afraid everywhere and all the time, and absolutely adorable. No one has ever done it better, before or since. I can still feel, I'm going to go back. Jerry Lou illuminating every room and every meal with her boundless heart for giving and loving, and you ever in motion, like the living water of the Babine. I can still feel the energy of that trip, my mom your Julie Andrews Sound of Music little sister. She was also in her element in a way I had never seen before. And it awakened in me that same wonder and love of the magnificent wild that has stayed with me for all of time ever since. My next memory, now it's 27 years later, and Mom, her granddaughter Jessie, my own larger-than-life husband Scott, who I do believe you loved more than me, but who can blame you? Our boys, Roger and Mike, we have made the journey to celebrate the decades of adventures that you and Jerry Lou and Judd and Cynthia have brought forth for the hundreds, no, thousands of lives who were blessed by the time they spent at the one and only Silver Hilton Lodge on the Babine. You are Babine Bob, a legend in your own time, and deservedly so. We are together for a family reunion. I am learning to skeet shoot under your expert eye. We are forming a river rock threshold, Mom and I, outside of one of the cabins. We are landing on a logging road as gracefully as a butterfly on a flower by Judd with his incredible God-given talent, skill, and protection as his own legend-in-the-making pilot. We are laughing until our sides hurt after eating too much of another of Jerry Lou's also forever legendary meals. How does she do it? Memories to treasure for a lifetime. What an incredible blessing. What an incredible pioneer you were, Uncle Bobby. What a legacy of life well lived. You have left for each of us to treasure. As I embark on the road ahead, I shall carry you with me in that indomitable Wickwire spirit that lives on in me to every rushing river, every mountain trail. God bless you, Uncle Bobby. And may peace be with you and all of us who loved you so.
We have a little time if anyone would like to come up and share a memory or a story. You're welcome to come up. We'd like to hear from you.
Well, I'm glad to hear that he had a sense of humor with other people, with me, because that's something I really remember about your dad. I call him Mr. Wickwire, and I recall years ago we, with Judd's team, a group of us went up to Silver Hilton Lodge for a rafting trip. And one of our stops was at the lodge, so we went down the Babine and up the lodge, and I remember we were fed wonderfully. We had a really nice time all around. It was really really nice trip. And then one afternoon, we were down by the water, and I don't know, I guess I asked, is there anything I can do to help you with? And I guess the innocence what I had, he says, yeah, why don't you just move these rocks from this side of the beach to the other side of the beach? And it took me about 45 minutes, and I was moving from one side to the other, and I was just being obedient. I thought I'm being really helpful here, really good. And I said, what did you need me to do that? Oh, I just wanted you to do something. So he had me stay out of trouble, I guess. So, but I recall his sense of humor, his wittiness, his smile was really contagious and be really missed. And it was nice always when he came over to see my parents. It was always good.
Hey, Jerry Lou. I'll miss coming over for all those good meals at the end of an adventure with Bob. yeah, it's a true story. He loved adventures, and I'm going to miss the phone calls. He phoned me every week, and we'd take notes. He'd say, you know, this lake, we're going to go to this lake, we're going to go here, we're going to do that. And I'll just share one story. There's many. But I remember Bob said, you know, we need to go to Stump Lake, and, you know, the kokanee, you know, they're really big there. And so we took 3 days off. We went there, and then on the last day, it started to rain, like about 7 in the morning. But we said, well, we're here, we're going to go fishing. We sat out in the rain for about 4.5 hours, and it just poured, like, didn't stop. And it's like, you know, but, you know, we got a fish. We came all the way here, and, well, after about 4 hours, we thought that it's not letting up, so we're gonna go. And so we packed everything up and then hooked the trailer up. By the time we left, the one road, there's 2 roads into Stump Lake on the backside there. And the mud, a couple of the other trucks had left, and the mud, the ruts were like about this. And they were not getting out. And apparently there's another road that goes up the steep mountain. It's all rocky or whatever. And we didn't make it there either, because the road's kind of like an angle like this, and the trailer swung out into the mud, and so we had to take the boat off, and we're out there for 2 hours digging it out, and yeah, but anyway, it was fun adventures with Bob. We had, you know, that's the way it goes. You know, that's the exciting. And then that's the stories. I mean, you know, if you haven't read the books, read his book, because there's some amazing stories in there. And if you go with Bob anywhere, it's an adventure, right? And I don't know, I can't say enough good things about him. He was a friend of a friend. I couldn't believe how many friends he made. He knew everybody in the fishing area. He made friends, more friends on Facebook than some of the young people. So anyway, he's a friend of everyone, you know, that's all I can say.
I wasn't anticipating coming up here, but I thought, I don't know a time when Wickwires weren't part of my life. They just have always been in my life. I don't even remember the first day I met them, but my mom and Bob went to school together, and I think that's where the connection started. But I think they're responsible for us moving to Smithers from Oregon. So it's your fault. I lived there for 33 years. And my parents had a fishing lodge also, and so we would go to their lodge, and I remember going to Babbing River and Babbing Lake also. And I remember sitting at the table one time eating Jerry Lou's delicious biscuits, which I still have the recipe, and I share it with many people. It's Jerry Lou's biscuit recipe that she just decided she's just going to write it down for us one day, and we finally got it from her. But I put my knife in the peanut butter jar and put it on my biscuit. I don't know, I was probably like 6 or 7, and I licked my knife, and Bob looks at me and goes, "You're not going to put that back in the peanut butter jar, are you?" So he had some, I guess I didn't have the good etiquette at the table when I was that age, but he liked to tease us a lot. And every summer when they would come to our house, my sister was younger than me, and she would be so excited. She's like, Wickwires are here, Wickwires are here. She couldn't say their last name. But yeah, you guys are so close to my heart, and I've just been able to recently reconnect with Cynthia again, and I was in her wedding, she was in my wedding, and yeah, we go lots and lots of history. I love you guys, and thank you for the foundation of your family that you've given to me in my life. Love you guys.
Hello, I'm Murray, fishing buddy of Bob's. We were fishing the Maurice River. We're going to be up there for about 7 days, and we're on this island, and that we were going to camp at. He had his previous dog, and we had this fancy turbo tent from Cabela's. And so we set that thing up, and like first day in there, and there's a gale blowing, and of course this tent that just kind of pops up, built strong, it just absolutely implodes. And so we're first day into the trip, and so what do? We got no tent, and it's up Maurice. It's going to be nasty weather. So we decided just to string a tarp over our stuff, and it's raining, it's windy, there's mice running over top of us. I'm sleeping on the ground, Bob's on his cot. I'm looking at Bob, wondering if he's going to say, let's pack her in. He didn't. And we just stuck it out, and it was awesome, but that's Bob. And he could keep a secret, too, because when I was up at White Lake with Bob fishing, we're just getting out, and we're both excited to get out there because it's in the fall time. It's getting a little cool, but there's fish around. And I'm in his boat, and I just catch a heel as I'm just going to put the anchor down, and I just totally fall into the lake. And Bob said, and then I quickly get out of the lake, and I'm up, and Bob says, kind of that big smile and he says, oh my gosh. And he said, I've never seen someone get out of the lake that fast. And I said, yeah, I that was fine. And he said, so how are you doing? And I said, I'm fine. And he said, I was hoping you were going to say that, even though I was soaked. And he said, and he actually said, if I hadn't written my book, I might have put that in my book. But anyways, I'll miss him. Cheers.
I guess I've known Jerry Lou and Bob and their family since Jacob was about 2 or something, when he told us one day at church that he always water skied at the wake in front of the boat. Anyhow, he also told us, which grandpa are you talking about? The one who makes flapjacks? Anyhow, I wanted to call Jerry Lou the other day, and I looked in my phone, and I took the top one, and it said Bob and Jerry Lou Wickwire, and it said cell phone, so I called it, and Bob answered, and he sounded so dismayed, and he said, who is this? And I said, oh, it's Glenda. I was looking for Jerry Lou. Is she there? And he said, now why would you have my cell number? He said, I never give it to a woman. And he said, I just can't figure it out. And I said, oh, it's okay. I'm sorry. I won't use it again. It's all right. I just wanted to know if Jerry Lou was there. And he said, no, she's not here, and I don't know quite when she'll be back, but I just don't know why you have my cell number. And I was very dumbfounded. I thought about it for quite a few minutes, and over the days, then we had Jerry Lou's birthday party, and Janet and her daughter Susie and Scott, we were all there, and Bob was sitting right there, and it was beautiful, sunny. He had this huge smile, and he looked over at me and he said, "I still can't figure it out. How did you get my cell number? I never give it to a woman."
Well, thank you for those great, great stories and great memories. And I think Josue will have our message now. Thank you.
When you hear the stories of people that have been impacted by a single person and the multitude of people that have been impacted by them, you find yourself very small on the fact of what you have ahead of you to leave a legacy. And I don't think he was living to leave a legacy. He was living because that's who he was and enjoy being and doing. And the point of what I've seen is not try to be like him. It's of course he has influenced so many. You see on the kids and the grandkids, but more so is to encourage who you are to grow. And this is the challenge that you have in your life. I visited with Jad. We talked a few times, but we had a nice visit once, and he wanted me to be sure that I had an insight of his dad that I didn't probably have the time to or the privilege to. And there's something that he believed that was very dear and important to him that has not been to mention here by direct word, but by who he was, and that was God. And I want to share with you a scripture. When I was thinking about to do a sermonette for you, for the family, and to honor his life, the traditional sermons that you can have for a memorial are not of much use, so to say. You want to have something more tailored, and I can promise you this will be very brief on the presentation, but I just want to give you 3 things that I believe were in light of what he said. There's many more, and from those many, I will just take 3 that will be important. And if you have your Bible or your phone or tablet with you, you can go to Matthew chapter 13. We will read the verse 44 till the verse 46. Matthew chapter 13, verse 44 to 46. Again, the kingdom of God, a kingdom of heaven, is like treasure hidden in a field, which a man found and hid, and for joy over this goes and sells all he has and buys the field. Again, the kingdom of heaven is like a merchant seeking beautiful pearls, who, when he had found one pearl of great price, went and sold all he had and bought it. And I found these verses applying a lot of the life of a man who had a dream and found a pearl of his great price and put all his heart into it. And all the story goes from there. It goes from a person who had a vision, and he was extremely smart when he found a person to help with the vision, to help the vision to make more successful. So there's three things that I think that were extremely valuable for him after talking to Judd. And I'm not by any means, if I come short with those three things, those are not the only three things. As you realize, there's many people that have come to share experiences, and everyone that comes here feels that they are falling short to share exactly who he was, and they don't want to fail to share the whole person who he was. So I'm not going to even try on that. The first thing that I believe that was dear to him is something that Judd mentioned to me in how they became Adventists. I asked that to Jerry Lou, how did he become Adventist? And he told me it was this person, a couple, a selfless couple that gave them a place to, whenever went to town, and took them into there, and they had their devotionals, they had time with God, and that example inspired him. And then Judd told me it was because of him that the family became a believer family. And that was so amazing, a story when Jesus Christ, and that was the first pearl. I should have said fishes instead of pearls, but it's not a parable of the great fisher. Well, there's a big fisher, there's many fishermen, but I was thinking there's this treasure that he found so dear. So the first treasure that he found so dear was not this logging cabin or the fishing business. Was Christ, the greatest treasure of his life. And who he was just reflected this thing. And with Christ coming into his life came the joy of life. And this person that you knew, became better just because of the person who was living in him. And you see this line of living with the man who he was because of Christ being so special to him. Second thing that was important to him, for what I've learned of, was the understanding of what he believed in the Bible. The principles of the Bible were important for him. And something that I will take for this was one of these principles. They are pretty attached to each other. One is the hope of the death and resurrection. We believe that because of the death of Christ, we can have a new life. We can have hope of resurrection. And the loss that we have in this earth is but brief for what we'll have eternity. And something that I can tell you is, just imagine a rope, and it will be very hard for us to picture eternity. But if you think in a rope that will be about 60 feet long, do you think a 60 feet long rope is quite long? I think it's super long, hard to handle. Eternity, to give you an idea, what we live in this earth in light of eternity is 1/8 of an inch, what we live in this earth. The rest of the rope will be eternity. What the people that are here, they have lost the friendship, the love, the laughter of grandpa, of the husband, of dad, of a friend. I will tell you, in light of eternity, this will be but small. And the time that remains here is just to get us ready to go to this place, to get ready for that place where we can mingle eternity with him. A lot of people, when they make an appointment to say, next time I will see you under the mango tree in heaven or at the feet of Jesus, wondering what will be for him. Probably will be under a cabin, a little lodge, or a cabela tent in heaven. but it will be a place where he can reunite with his loved ones, with his friends. And he might write the second book, the second part of the book, and your stories will be part of that. Just make sure that you have those things too. The things that are treasured to him. Jesus Christ and the joy of salvation, and the hope and resurrection of Jesus Christ. That although the loss hurts in this earth, there's hope in Jesus Christ for a new life. And the last thing that I believe was important for him, I asked Jude for one thing. Please give me a story that nobody else will tell. Because there's a lot of people who will tell him many stories, and many very close stories. And he sent me this. So something that, of course, he did often was fishing, right? That's what he did. But what he told me is that he went to do this fishing, especially salmon, on fresh water or on the ocean. And the biggest fish, he will give it to other people. Or sometimes the whole thing. And he will just bring the leftovers to the house. And Judd mentioned to me that he was a bit very unhappy as a young man, that he will not bring the best fish to his house. But Bob, learned to give, and to give selflessly and many times quietly. So the third pearl is exactly that one, that God gave all for him. And something that he learned to live in his life was to give his best to others. And the best for people was something that he had. And this is a very powerful lesson. What he had was the skill to fish, so he will bring this. Something else that he had was laughter, was humor, was a deep thought. Josh shared with me a couple of things that he wrote, and I thought that he copy-pasted from a book. Said, no, my dad wrote that. And deep thinking that to share with people. So another thing that I believe will be important, and definitely should be important for you, is to give your best for people. God gave it all for you because he loved you. You can also give your best to others. I heard, when I was young, a sentence that said something like, when you were born, everybody around you were laughing, they were laughing and smiling, but you were crying. Live your life in such a way that when you die, you will be smiling, everybody else will be crying. And I think he achieved that. He achieved in a way that you won't be crying. You will be crying just because you miss him so much. But also the smile, the experience, the touch of his life will be ever present. May God give you comfort to all of you that love him and miss him dearly.
There is coming a day when no heartaches shall come, no more clouds in the sky, no more tears to dim the eye. All is peace forevermore on that happy golden shore. What a day, glorious day that will be. What a day that will be when my Jesus I shall see, and I look upon his face, the one who saved me by his grace, when he takes me by the hand and leads me to the promised land. What a day, glorious day that will be.
There'll be no more sorrow there, no more burdens to bear, no more sickness, no more pain, no more parting over there, and forever I will be with the one who died for me. What a day, glorious day that will be. Oh.
What a day that will be when my Jesus I shall see, and I look upon his face, the one who saved me by his grace, when he takes me by the hand and leads me to the promised land. What a day, glorious day that will be. What a day that will be when my Jesus I shall see, and I look upon his face, the one who saved me by his grace, when he takes me by the hand and leads me to the promised land. What a day, glorious day that will be. What a day, glorious day that will be. That will be.
Lord, in this house, there are many people who are suffering for the loss of someone they dearly loved, and now they remember. In the space where there's loss, I want you please put peace. In the place where there is just brokenness, that you will bring love with gentle touch. I want to ask you, Lord, that your presence might be felt, that you will awake the sense of your surrounding loving presence on each one of the grandkids, on each one of the kids, that you will awake on Jerry Lou your presence, Lord, and you will give them a gentle touch of your love. That life, the life that you preserved, that you protected, that you brought close to you, that you influenced and used, Lord, you are the same God, and you will be with them. Give them your strength and your peace. For those who are here, that are friends, that are relatives, that were around him, I ask you for your blessings upon them. And more than ever, Lord, we want to ask you to please come soon. Because separation in this earth is hard. But what a moment will be when we go with you to heaven. Bless your people here, Lord. Minister their hearts. In the name of Jesus Christ, I pray, amen.